Now again, this next sentence, by the way, I'll throw out something to you. There's 4 or 5 sentences in this book that are so profound to me that you will never hear talked about in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. So what I'll throw out to you is start bringing them up in meetings. This next sentence, well, let me ask you this. How many of you been to a meeting of AA where this next sentence was the topic? I turned back to the list, for this list held the key to my future. You ever been to a meeting where that was a topic? Don't you think that's kind of important? This list holds the key to your entire future. Isn't that something? Some of you curious about that? You don't think that minute holds the key to your entire future, do you? This poor gentleman for 23 years, if he knew this, would have had a whole different life, I promise you. I'll point out some of these, and from now on, go into a few meetings in Memphis, we'll mess them up. Someone says, do you have a topic? Say, yes. I'd like you to share your experience with turning back to the list, for it holds the key to your future. See what happens. Or in the 10th step, do you have a topic? Yes. Share your experience with having entered the world of the Spirit and using your 6th sense. Neat little stuff like that, right? Now, I want to do what I call the bridge. How's this man, how's he going to get free of his attachment to all those states? This is called the bridge. It says we're going to look at it, these first 3 columns, 3rd column, from a whole different angle. And here's how I'm going to start to look at it. I begin to see that the world and its people, my ex-wife, really dominated me. Column 2, all the things she did. In that state, me being completely controlled by my wife because I'm identified and everything else, the wrongdoing of others, my 2nd column, what she did, fancied or real, has the power to kill me. 3rd column, how do I escape? I saw these resentments must be mastered. How? I can't wish them away in alcohol. So this is my course. This is the bridge. This is freedom. I realized the people, column 1, my wife, who wronged me, what she did, column 2, was perhaps spiritually sick. Page 67. Though I did not like their symptoms, 3rd column, I'm sorry, 2nd column, what she did, and the way these disturbed me, 3rd column, she, like me, was sick too. So the first thing that we start to understand is the name I have written in the 1st column and what they did in the 2nd is that perhaps that person, that course of action, what I resent in the 2nd column, perhaps that's the actions of somebody who was spiritually sick like me. And what that means is the book is going to put you on equal footing. You are upset and resentful. I'll give you an example of what I mean. Do you believe that a spiritually awakened person who is in a marriage could cheat on their husband or wife? Do you believe that? Anyone here believe that? I don't. I don't. Why? Because their word would be their bond. Their behavior would be impeccable. That's why. That is the behavior of somebody who is spiritually sick. No choice. Driven. You're sitting in judgment and you're resentful of someone who's spiritually sick who couldn't have done it any different. Therefore, you're spiritually sick as well. The book is trying to get you on some equal ground here, aren't they? Right? And it goes on to say, God, help me show what I've written, the name in column 1, the same tolerance, pity, and patience I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. Those of you that have had a friend die of some horrible disease like cancer, etc., will know that at times their behavior is less than spiritual. And I've never yet gotten angry at someone like that. I was raised, my parents had a nursing home. So I was raised around elderly people. who acted like this a lot. I never got upset. I mean, I've had him throw feces at me. I've had all kinds of weird stuff happen. Never got upset at him at all. And the book is trying to suggest something. You need to take that attitude into these people, because what you've written in column 2 are the actions of a spiritually sick person. And I like to add to that, who's asleep, dreaming they're awake. Excuse me. So do you see what the book's starting to do here? When a person offended, I say to myself, this is a sick woman. How can I be helpful to her? God save me from being angry, thy will be done. I'm going to avoid any retaliation or argument. Why? I wouldn't treat sick people that way. If I do, I destroy my chance of being helpful. Now the book says, referring to my list again, putting out of the minds the wrongs others had done, the second column, I'm going to resolutely look for my own mistakes. Where have I been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened? Though a situation is not entirely my fault, I'm going to try to disregard the other person involved entirely. Now, if I was working with that gentleman and we had a bunch of time, I suspect that I could help him see where over the years that there was a lot of selfish, self-centered behavior on his part that may have contributed to her leaving.
And there's 3 ways to look at that: before she left, while she was leaving, and after. Sometimes you didn't do anything before to set the ball rolling, but it would be good, like Mark was saying, to start with him, with what did he do to start that whole ball rolling. You know, did he become work only? Were her needs put aside? Was she neglected? Was business first? Was he cheating? You know, there's a lot of stuff on his side that he needs to see for him to get free.
Right.
What went on while she was doing it, while he was in the middle of the anger, and what was done after to retaliate, to get back, that was selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and rooted in fear.
Not only that, you go all the way back to the beginning. The big book says something, and this is a great starting point. It said at some point he made a decision based on self, which later placed him in a position to be hurt. So you go back to all the way when you first met her. I'll ask you a simple question. Did she have any prior history of ever being involved with one man and then cheating that you knew about? Okay. But you understand the point Joe and I are making. You go way back to then, right up to then, and I'll bet you we could see all kinds of things on your part that could have contributed to this.
I met a woman who was recently released from the mental institution, and later, maybe there was a clue there, you know. I was 20 years sober, and I met somebody with 30 days, and boom, all of a sudden I'm blaming her for going crazy, and what were my basic motives for getting involved, you know.
And then, you know, dishonesty, 3 ways you're dishonest. 1 is you lie. 2, you're dishonest by omission. And 3, you're dishonest from a standpoint of self-delusion. I'll take you back to one of the points of selfishness, self-centeredness on his part, is he thinks her actions are about him. I went through something very similar, and I'll tell you where I got free, is I realized that her actions, her getting in an affair, had absolutely nothing to do with me. And that was all about her. And I got free. See, when you take things personal, that is a manifestation of selfishness. Does that make sense? Of course, fears, you can imagine the fears that would probably show up in this inventory. You're back to the same thing Joe talked about. The fears that he had maybe when they started dating, the fears that happened after they got married, the fears that happened after all this. There would have been a lot of fear going on in that whole dynamic. And what happens when you start to take a look at the 4th column and you start to look at your part divorced of the first 3, now you begin to get pulled away from all of those roles that he thought was defining who and what he was.
Has anybody in this room ever found a resentment where they didn't play a part? We always get the same example. A young child, man or woman, molested. What part did an innocent 9, 10-year-old, whatever, however old child play in that? They didn't. They were pure, innocent young child. But what they did with it for the next 30 years that was selfish and self-seeking and dishonest and rooted in fear is what led to the resentment still being there. I've been writing inventory for almost 21 years, and I've yet to find a resentment where I didn't play a part. You can get free. In the fourth column, thank God my troubles with her leaving me were of my own making, because she doesn't need to do nothing for me to get free. And if any of you are sitting around waiting for somebody to come back from the dead, or somebody in Alcoholics Anonymous to make amends, or for you to get free, you're screwed. I was waiting for my dad to come back from the dead. He'd been dead since I was 21 years old, and a part of me said, unless he, I will never, blah, blah, blah. Right? I'd like to hear a resentment that somebody's had where they didn't see their part in any way, before, during, or after. If you take it one step further, at the bottom of the fourth column here, because he's written out, where was I selfish? And he gives some examples. Have you seen since 23 years where you played a part in all of this happening? Did you make amends to her?
Oh, yeah.
Did you get free?
Yes.
Did you move on?
Yes.
Did she move on?
Yes.
Are you friends?
Yes.
Boom. You see where you're selfish. Not a check mark, an explanation. Self-seeking, dishonest, afraid. Now what I would do now is I would stay in this fourth column where the truth lies. None of this is true. But I still think that she leaving me is part of why I held on to this. At the bottom here, I would stay in the fourth column until I could rewrite column 1 and column 2. I'm mad at myself for driving her away. Or I'm mad at God for not giving me the power to have not allowed this to happen. You'll find every one of them. You'll get free when you see all of the first 3 columns are a lie that your ego's trying to tell you are true. You'll come down to about 5 toward yourself and 5 toward God. Do 4 columns on those, and that will be the meat and the potatoes of the inventory. I'm mad at myself for driving her away, so I put that down on another piece of paper. When I get done, I'll find out there's a bunch of repeats all through the inventory. I came down to 2 toward myself and 2 toward God. Now you got to be careful of 2 things that they warned us about with this when you move into the truth. When you move into the truth, you got to be very careful for 2 things. One would be low self-esteem kicking in and saying, "Oh my God, the fourth column, look at what a rotten, terrible person I am," and you beat yourself up and the ego has won. It's won. "Oh, I'm so selfish. No, you got to go. If you get stuck in the fourth column and you're beating yourself bloody, go back to the statement that says our troubles are our own making and stay on that statement in prayer and meditation until you can come back to the fourth column and say, wow, thank God my troubles in this situation were of my making, because if it was of that person in the first column's making, they're going to have to do something for me to get free. So you don't want to beat yourself up in the fourth column, but you also don't want to play this game. Oh, look at how aggressive I was. Look at how much of a whore I was. And all those people, all those personalities in the circle that Mark described, all they do is start to say, oh, so now I'll just... And you start to create yourself in your own image, and all you do is create a new third column. The monk becomes a whore. The whore becomes a monk. The passive person takes a class in being a little more assertive. When you start to see the truth, you don't want to start to decide at that point what God would have you be. He doesn't always want you to be the opposite of what you think it is. Because then all those personalities do is get up and change seats. Right? Rambo becomes a little more loving. Mr. AA becomes a little more assertive. Romeo becomes a little less obsessed about sex. And you're just creating all new personalities. They just change seats. So don't beat yourself up in the fourth column, and don't recreate yourself in the image that you think God has for you in the fourth column when you just start to discover truth. So what happens? How do you get free when you've seen the truth? You do 5, 6, 7, 8. He went back to her, he made amends, and he returns to his center. He returns at 1. And if this is what we're looking at when you're in a state of unoneness, Is that a word? Oneness. When you're in a state of all these different committee members are in control, you never know which one's going to wake up on any given day, and you do 4 through 9, and he's made his amends, and you return back to atone at one. Atonement is to become at one. In that state, there's no such thing as a relationship. There's only equanimity, love, compassion, and tolerance for all. Some people you're closer to than others, but you show them the same tolerance and patience and love that you would. And in that state, there is not relationships. Do you ever remember this? Boy, I remember this when I first heard it. You haven't been home for a while. You got a new girlfriend. You're going to take the new girlfriend to Battle Creek, Michigan to meet your family, and you've waken up a little bit and you're pretty extroverted and you're not quiet and withdrawn anymore like I was, and you take the new girlfriend home to Battle Creek, and you're in the room with your girlfriend, your mother, your father, your sister, your brother, and an old friend, and you get in that room and all of a sudden you can't say a word. You know why? You got a different belief system for each of those separate relationships and a different role in each and every one of them. You can't be the son and the father and the boyfriend and the best friend all at the same time, and you wonder why you can't say a word, because you're scattered with different beliefs and different roles in each of these relationships. If these personalities get smashed, which is ego deflation, you get back to center. There aren't individual relationships. There's love, understanding. And I've seen people that live that way. I've had times where I am that way. You lose the identity to the role.
So hopefully that was helpful to you all in seeing what you're up against. Real quick personal experience. I had that experience, except my second column would have read, "My wife ran off to Montana for a year with a man I used to sponsor." That was my second column. Right? Today what I'll tell you in that is she calls me seeking spiritual advice. Now, how do you get from "I'm going to execute them" to there?
And he's now a,
You know,
he's now a
he's now very happily married to another woman, and been sober 17, 18 years.
I had one in my last inventory I read to Mark and a few other people. I resent people, column 1, I resent people who try to control me. Column 2, they tell me not to smoke, they tell me what to eat, they tell me how to live, and in the middle of that he starts laughing at me and he says, "Look at what you do with the love from other people who care about whether you live." I'm like, holy moly. I resent them when they love me, I resent them when they don't. In an unfit spiritual condition, the people in your life are in a no-win situation. If she says something, it's wrong. If she doesn't say something, she should have. If it's raining, it should be sunny. If it's sunny, it should be raining. In an unfit spiritual condition, there was one in my inventory. I resent the people I had started to work with who pooped out. The next one was, I resent the people I worked with who got free and didn't need me anymore. They're screwed if they do, they're screwed if they don't when you're in an unfit spiritual condition. Which leads me to believe that when you're in a fit spiritual condition, you're not dominated by what they do or don't do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if your troubles are of your own making, she doesn't need to come back, see the light, forgive you, or nothing. And I'll say it again. Don't hold your breath if you're waiting for someone in Alcoholics Anonymous to make amends to you. I've been doing this for a long time, and I could probably count on 2 or 3 hands the number of people in AA that have made amends to me. And I know a lot more than that have harmed me. Anybody keep a day timer? I keep a day timer, Filofax. It's got the closest people in my life are in there. And I like to watch the Filofax go from the people I love to the people I resent to the people I owe amends to. It goes from the people you love to your first column of your inventory to your amends list. The funny thing is, there's no separation between my amends list, my first column, and my current agnosticism. And it's all a reflection of the current unmanageability. It's connected. You see the current unmanageability? It is alcohol. It is the agnosticism. It is where I'm running my life on self-will. It is my first column, and it is my 8-step list. and there's no separation between the 8-step list and a drink of alcohol. But what happens to people in amends is, and this is where Mark talked about, we'll talk about going backwards through the steps. You go to somebody and you say, I'm down to my last 10 amends, but I'm having a problem. And he says, do you know where they are? Yep. Do you know the nature of the harm? Yep. Do you know where to find them? Yep. You're not having trouble with amends. Maybe in the 8th step you really didn't finish the second half of step 8. Maybe you didn't really become willing to make amends to them all. Maybe you glossed over second half of step 8. The most overlooked word in the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous is the last word of the step 8. All. Because maybe you didn't really ask in step 7 what you were supposed to, and maybe you weren't really clear with 6 because you didn't learn enough of humility and honesty in step 5. Maybe your inventory wasn't real clear, or maybe you've gone back on your decision at the 3rd step because now you don't believe God is everything because you're not really sure you're alcoholic anymore, and those unfinished amends don't have anything to do with you drinking again. So I got a great prayer for you. If you're stuck in inventory, if you're stuck in 9, if you're having trouble with 10, 11, and 12, if working with people isn't that, you don't feel that passionate about it anymore, say the prayer. Do these unfinished amends. Does this unfinished inventory, does me doing steps 10 and 11 with some sort of discipline have anything to do with whether I drink again or not? Amen. You'll be shown. I'd love to say that I came up with this, but a woman we know who's from our group in LA who lived in Dallas last year, she said this. She said, you can go forward. There are people who can take you forward through the steps. There are people that can take you backwards through the steps. But in either direction, you got to be really careful that the dash in the first step doesn't turn into a wall and you get stuck on the dash going in either direction, and all of a sudden 9 doesn't have anything to do with being powerless. It just has to do with your life being unmanageable. You're feeling a little better. You don't need to finish amends because you get stuck on the dash. One of the greatest things I ever heard for why I get stuck in the word. You get stuck on the dash in the first step, and whatever step you're on, the dash turned into a wall, and whatever step you're stuck on no longer has to do with being powerless over alcohol. It just has to do with fixing your life the way you think it should be. Stuck on the dash.
I want to read something that dovetails into this. As you identify less and less with the I, you'll be more at ease with everybody and with everything. Do you know why? Because you're no longer afraid of being hurt or not liked. You no longer desire to impress anyone. Can you imagine the relief when you don't have to impress anybody anymore? Oh, what a relief. Happiness at last. You no longer feel the need or the compulsion to explain things anymore. It's all right. What is there to be explained? And you don't feel the need or compulsion to apologize anymore. I'd much rather hear you say I've come awake than hear you say I'm sorry. I'd much rather hear you say to me, I've come awake since we last met. What I did to you won't happen again, than to hear you say, I'm so sorry for what I did to you. Why would anyone demand an apology? You have something to explore in that. Even when somebody supposedly was mean to you, there's no room for apology. Nobody was mean to you. Somebody was mean to what he or she thought was you, but not to you. Nobody ever rejects you. They're only rejecting what they think you are. But that cuts both ways. Nobody ever accepts you either. Till people come awake, they're simply accepting or rejecting their image of you. They fashion an image of you, and they're rejecting or accepting that. See how devastating it is to go deeply into that. It's a bit too liberating. But how easy it is to love people when you understand this. How easy it is to love everybody when you don't identify with what they imagine you are or they are. It becomes easy to love them, to love everybody. So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I recently heard a 5th step, and I got 2 classic pieces from my friend's 4th column I just got to share with you. This was a resentment toward himself for not relying on God. And in the 4th column he wrote, I'm selfish because I put myself in a place where I don't depend and rely on God, and then accuse God that I don't rely on for why I don't depend and rely on Him. Let me read that again. I am selfish for being in a place where I don't depend and rely upon God, and then accuse that which I don't depend and rely on for why I don't depend and rely on it. Wow. This was another one. He was resentful at himself for not having the discipline to do meditation every day. And he put dishonest. Thinking that I don't have the discipline to sit is just a basic laziness in a defiant act to reserve the right to drink. I think sometimes in the inventory process there's a piece there that's missed by a lot of people and not talked about a lot, and that's the sex ideal. This is a chosen ideal for the future. You get to choose it. You get to ask God to help mold it. Some of the instructions for the book were, we subject each relation to this test. Was it selfish or not? We ask God to help mold this ideal. We ask God to help us live up to the ideal and neither use it lightly or selfishly, nor be despised or loathed. Another statement is we must be willing to grow toward our ideal. We must be willing to make amends where we have done harm. We ask God what to do about each specific matter. We realize that some people are as fanatical as others are loose. We avoid hysterical thinking or advice. We pray for the right ideal. We pray for guidance in each questionable situation. We pray for sanity. We pray for strength to do the right thing. If sex is very troublesome, we throw ourselves the harder into helping others, and we think of their needs and work for them. And I ask God to mold that ideal. And this time for me, it was not seeing a separation between relationships with you, myself, or God. Because in this last inventory, I answered the 9 questions from the sex inventory about my relationship with God and myself and others. And my ideal now is for the future in all relationships. I would like to be blah, 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 blah. I would like to not suffer from the delusion that these 3 areas of relationships are separate, or that there isn't even such a thing as a relationship. That I would like my connection to God, my connection to you, and my connection to myself to be seen as one. And with that, I would like to, and you get to choose. You want to be single and free and date and have fun? Be clear about that. Be honest about that. Tell people you meet that. This is what I've chosen. This is where I'm at. If you've decided something else, be honest with yourself about it. But it's a chosen ideal. And it does say specifically what will happen if you're sorry for when you cause harm, and what will happen if you don't live up to that ideal and your conduct continues to harm others. You're quite sure to drink.
Be realistic about the sane and sound ideal you write out. I'm taking a gentleman who's 24 years old to the steps now. He's been sober 6 years. So he was over there one day. He had nailed himself to the cross, beating himself up because he keeps falling short in what he calls the sane and sound ideal. So I had him read it to me, and I looked him dead in the eye, and I said, if you were 40 years old and a monk, you might be able to pull that off. It was as unrealistic as you could ever imagine. And so I had him go back and rewrite it and let it be realistic. And so he did, and he's a lot more at peace with it. If you have your big book, if you turn to page 70, and just by virtue of time, we're gonna move on. There is a paragraph here when they sum up about sex. You can use this paragraph in literally any area of your life, and there's 4 components to it. It says, to sum up about sex: 1, we earnestly pray for the right ideal. 2, guidance in each questionable situation. 3, sanity. That means soundness of mind. And 4, for the strength to do the right thing. That's a tool you could use in any area of your life, from business and any area of your life. Anything you want to do, that is an incredible tool that you could start working with. I'll give you an example. 2 months ago, I weighed 23 pounds more than I weigh right now. And I told you I'm going back through the steps. And let me say this. I don't have judgments about anything. What will happen to me in the years I've been sober is what will start filtering through my consciousness is something that I want to have change. So that's what I always take back to my first step. And when I was doing my first step, what came up in my consciousness is I'm through with my weight fluctuating up and down, and I'm through without having a consistent workout program. I don't want to be that way anymore, and I want a good, solid food plan. And that's one of the many things that happened to me in my first step this time. And to make a long story short, out of that came a sane and sound idea what that thing looked like, and it's 60 days later, and I've been taken to this place. I run 6 days a week. I've lost 23 pounds. I'm following an incredibly good food plan, which I like. I use this every morning in this area of my life. I have a sane and sound ideal. God, give me the strength to do the right thing. Give me guidance in questionable situation. But see, I mentioned the spiritual law before. God won't do for me what I'm supposed to do for myself. See, I've got to do those kinds of things, right? Got to understand what unconditional love is. If I didn't want to do any of that, God wasn't going to change any of that. I'm doing some of the same work around smoking right now. Why? Because I have judgments about smoking? No, I've just reached a place where it's no longer acceptable to me. People say, why do you smoke? I said, well, because I'm addicted. You know, that's why. But anyhow, there's a lot of ways you can use this particular paragraph other than just how it's written in the book. And so there's 4 components to it. Now, I'm going to go over these last couple paragraphs, then we'll take another break, then we'll have one more session. And we're going to kind of do we're going to shorten the amount of time on 5, 6, 7. But so it talks about if I've been thorough about these personal inventory, I've written down a lot, I've listed and analyzed my resentments. I've begun to comprehend the futility and fatality. I always stop people there, and I want to talk about that. Resentments are futile because you don't have any power or control over other human beings. Allow them to be. If you don't like their behavior, get the hell away from them because it probably isn't going to change. But allow them to be. It is futile. You know, if you pick up a rabid skunk and think it's going to act like a little bunny, you're wrong. Just get clear. See, there isn't anybody in my life that has to change anything about how they act. What I do is I get real clear on what's in front of me and how it's acting. If I don't care for it, I stay away from it. It's that simple. But they don't have to change because it's futile for me to resent other people, right? It's not going to happen. I use this example all the time. Oh, you want the cat to act like a dog. I don't think it's going to happen. The cat's going to be a cat, right? Resentments are futile. Why? I can't do anything about it. So why do you really have them? We talked about why you have them. If my arrangements would only stay put. I know better than God who's supposed to be in my life, how long, what it looks like, how it feels. We were talking about love earlier. Here's the truth. If you love somebody, if somebody walked into your home, and you're married, says I want a divorce, if in fact you love them, you know what? You'd have one response. You know what it'd be? God bless you, go in peace. Thank you for the time. Done. Gone. Turn to the next thing.
Doesn't mean there's not pain. It doesn't mean there's not grief.
Yeah.
It means there's lack of dependence. It means you know where your dependence comes from.
Everything is impermanent, ladies and gentlemen. I read to you earlier, every cell in your body is gone in 7 days. You and I live in a world of impermanence, and the more that you're identified with your mind, the more you want constancy.
Remember those childish ideas that you used to write in your boyfriend or girlfriend's yearbook in high school? We'll be together forever. Never saw her after the day of graduation. Mm-hmm. Or the stuff that people used to write in your big book when you were in treatment. We've become so close while we were here in treatment, and we'll see each other as we trudge the road of happy destiny. Right? 6 months later, everyone you were in treatment with is drunk. And all you did was have sex in a broom closet anyway, and you thought you were really close. I never did that, but he did, I think.
If you live long enough, everything you dearly love will be taken from you. The sooner you understand that, it can cause a whole shift in your perception, in which everything is on loan for a period of time. Understand that. But wear the world like a loose garment. Love it for the length of time it's in your life. When it's here, it's here, and when it's gone, it's gone. Come at things in that fashion. Things take on a new meaning in your life when you have that kind of experience. I want to finish up here real quick. Comprehend futility, fatality. My futility will lead to a fatality. I get futile at your behavior because I can't control it. I think it needs to turn out a certain way to be okay. I get resentful. I get blocked. I get diseased. My mind says take a drink. I take a drink and I die. Let's go. My name's Mark. I'm an alcoholic. Another reading. This is called More Words. Mark Twain put it very nicely when he said, "It was so cold that if the thermometer had been an inch longer, we would have frozen to death." We do freeze to death on words. It's not the cold outside that matters, but the thermometer. It's not reality that matters, but what you're saying to yourself about it. I was told a lovely story about a farmer in Finland. When they were drawing up the Russian-Finnish border, the farmer had to decide whether he wanted to be in Russia or Finland. After a long time, he said he wanted to be in Finland, but he didn't want to offend the Russian officials. They came to him and wanted to know why he wanted to be in Finland. The farmer replied, "It has always been my desire to live in Mother Russia, but at my age I wouldn't be able to survive another Russian winter." Russia and Finland are only words, concepts, but not for human beings, not for crazy human beings. We're almost never looking at reality. A guru was once attempting to explain to a crowd how human beings react to words, feed on words, live on words, rather than on reality. One of the men stood up and protested. He said, I don't agree that words have all that much effect on this." The guru said, "Sit down, you son of a bitch." The man went livid with rage and said, "You call yourself an enlightened person, a guru, a master, but you ought to be ashamed of yourself." The guru then said, "Pardon me, sir. I was carried away. I really beg your pardon. That was a lapse. I'm sorry." The man finally calmed down. Then the guru said, "It took just a few words to get a whole tempest going within you. And it took just a few words to calm you down, didn't it? Words, 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 words. How imprisoning they are if they're not used properly." Turn to page 72. I'm just going to hit highlights when I'm either going to read inventory or someone's going to read inventory to me. I open the big book up and we begin to read from page 70 up through page 75 because I want them to be very clear what we're about to do. If you will work with people out of the big book, then they won't develop a dependency on you. They will go to the tool that we were given, which is the big book. So some highlights, beginning with chapter 6 into action. This particular chapter, I think, has 7 steps in it. It says, having made our personal inventory, what should we do about it? We've been trying to get a new attitude, 2nd step. New relationship with our Creator, 3rd step. Discover the obstacles in our path. We've admitted certain defects. We've ascertained a rough way what the trouble is. We put our finger on the weak items in our personal inventory. These are about to be cast out. This requires action on our part, which when completed means we admit to God, to ourselves, to another human being, the exact nature of our defects. So that's what you're looking for in the 5th step, the exact nature of your defects. This brings us to the 5th step in the program recovery mentioned in the preceding chapter. They go on and tell you that a solitary self-appraisal is insufficient. And then again, I told you got 2 doors, die an alcoholic death or open the door to the 5th step. 5 lines up from the bottom, the best reason first. If I skip this vital step, I may not overcome drinking. Time after time, newcomers have tried to keep to themselves certain facts about their lives, Trying to avoid this humbling experience, they turned to easier methods and almost invariably got drunk. Book goes on to say, having persevered the rest of the program, they wondered why they fell. Because they took inventory but hung on to some worst items and sought. They only thought they had lost their egoism and fear. They only thought they had humbled themselves. Then you get that paragraph that I think really describes theater of the lie. More than most people, the alcoholic leads a double life. He's very much the actor. To the outer world, he presents his stage character or characters. And then it talks about he has inconsistency. Then the next paragraph talks about over and over this need for being honest. Bottom of the page, I must be entirely honest with somebody if I expect to live long or happily in this world. Paul Martin wrote a great article on sin and mental health. And in that article, after having interviewed a whole bunch of people, what he talked about is that everything is connected. And if you have any area of your life in which you're being dishonest, it's connected to every other area. One of the things I think, one of the reasons people will drink behind unfinished amends or unwritten inventory is because they are consistently violating their conscience, and whether they're awake to it or not, they can't live with the pain of that, and they'll go drink behind that. But any single area of your life in which you're practicing any form of dishonesty, I promise you, is showing up in every area of your life. That's my experience. And then now you're going to get some instructions on who you're going to read this inventory. It says we think well before we choose the person or persons. Highlight that. Because you can read your fifth step to a person or multiple people. Several years ago, Joe and I were introduced to the idea of multiple fifth steps, where I take some inventory and I read it to different people. When I go through the steps this time, I'll read my inventory to probably a minimum of 5 people. Probably read it to Joe, that woman that has 38 years sober, the man I call my sponsor, and I'll probably read it to a couple people I sponsor. Why do I do that? Because I want to get completely pulled back and free of any of my identification with those ego states that we're talking about. And every time I've done a multiple fifth step, the results were incredible. I'll never forget the first time I did it was I went to California and read to Joe. Then I read to a man in Kerrville, Texas, and then I went down to Louisiana and read to a woman long time sober. It was one of my most profound experiences through the steps. The 6th and 7th step, I had an experience with him I'd never had before, and the most amazing thing at all, as a result of reading inventory 3 times to 3 different people, is I had no resistance anywhere with a single amend. Now, when you have that kind of effect, and you're the alcoholic of my type, that really catches your attention. And the only thing I've done different is I did multiple fifth steps, following an instruction out of the book, which is persons, plural. I've been doing multiple fifth steps ever since. See, my ego is so defended, I am so bound to my self-will, reading inventory to one person, I realize now, will not free me. It hasn't. So I would throw that out for your consideration if you've never done multiple fifth steps. The next time you write inventory, find 2 or 3 or 4 different people to read inventory to. I have particularly found this effective with people with long-term sobriety. Do you know why? Why do you think? Because your ego will insulate you and take you to a place of, I don't really do much wrong. I'm this spiritual man, blah, 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 blah. The ego's still operating in the same fashion. It's just got a new face to it. Right? I told you about that woman, long time sober. And it took 6 hours to split her ego right down the middle. For her to talk about this double life she'd been leading. Talk about this, and you know what was funny? Most of it was taking place in her mind. Sitting in meetings and judgmental and angry and resentful, and people weren't doing it. So I throw that out for your consideration. So goes on and talks about we search our acquaintance for a closed-mouth understanding friend. We have no right to save our skin at another person's expense. Some parts of our story we tell to someone who will understand yet be unaffected. The rule is we must be hard on ourselves but always considerate of others. Bottom of the page. We're very anxious we talk to the right person. Here's more instructions. It's important this person be able to keep a confidence, they understand and approve what I'm driving at, they will not try to change my plan. When I decide who's to hear my story, I waste no time. I have a written inventory and I'm prepared for a long talk. So I explain to my partner what we're about to do and why I have to do it. Now here's the next sentence is another sentence that some of you I would hope would bring up in a meeting of AA. I think it's fairly important. Here's what it says. He should realize that we're engaged upon a life and death errand. I think that's pretty important. You might bring that up as a topic and say, share your experience with that sentence. That's about the death of the ego and the life of the spirit. We are reborn. Who I read my 5 steps to, I assure you, is critically important to me. Are they a real alcoholic? I have done 5 steps with men of the cloth. Are they a real alcoholic? Do they understand or approve what I'm doing on? Are they doing work themselves? Do they understand that my life is at stake here? See, if you're going to listen to my 5th step and you're concerned about how I feel about what you say to me, you're useless to me. In particular, I watch this happen with women in AA. They want to develop these mother-daughter relationships, blah, 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 blah. If I care about how you feel about what I say to you, I have become useless to you. You follow? You'll kill people that way. That isn't what I'm here for. I'm here to go through these steps, and I am here to share my experience. I'm here to help you see your truth. It's not that I'm insensitive. As a matter of fact, it is because I care that much that I finally got free of that belief system. Anyone who's ever worked with me, and there's a few people in this room, will tell you that. And I tell people right up front, if you've got incredibly sensitive feelings, I'm not the guy to work with, because I won't lie to you. See? So it's a life and death errand. It is life and death. That's how important that 5th step is. I allow time for it. I don't answer telephones. I don't, I've heard a lot of different things. Oh, I read it in the car. Oh, that's great. You're supposed to be driving in the car. Right? I think when it says life and death, I think it's life and death, and I need to treat it that way. And I do approach it that way. I normally burn a little incense or I burn sage at the start of it. We read this, and then we're going to get going on this inventory. And I am very much a participant in a 5th step. I don't just sit and listen. I'm there to give feedback. I have a notepad, and when I hear things, life and death things, I make notes. I stop. I talk. We ask questions. Do you see this? Do you see this? Do you see your defect here? Those kinds of things. It says most people approach in this way would be glad to help, so I'm going to pocket my pride, go to it, illuminating every twisted character, every dark cranny of the past. And then we get on with the 5th step. And I have them read the resentment to me, then the fear inventory, then the sex inventory. When we're done with that, I come back to the book, and now I get what I call the 5th step promises. Once I've taken this step, withholding nothing, I always like to stop there and say, have you withheld anything from me? Those of you who've listened to 5th steps know that it's normally sexual. But I like to stop there and ask that question, have you withheld anything from me? The other thing I was going to mention to you that I also do is I normally will keep the last inventory I've written, and anyone whose inventory I'm going to listen to, I like to read a little of that inventory to them. I'll never forget this. This guy only had about 6 months sobriety. I think I must have had 19 years then. So I read this inventory, kind of like what Joe shared, something along those lines. He starts laughing. I said, what are you laughing at? And he said, well, I had this idea that you'd be weller than this. I said, well, good. I'm glad you've gotten over that, Paul Martin's at, 56, 57 years sober. He writes inventory at the drop of a hat, Remember, the best we get to practice here is the spirituality of imperfection. I never met an enlightened drunk. I don't think it's going to happen. I could be wrong. So here's the 5th step promises. First promise, I can be delighted. Second promise, I can look the world in the eye. I can be alone at perfect peace and ease. My fears fall from me. I begin to feel the nearness of my Creator. See, here's what's starting to happen. You do this work and do this 5th step, and you begin to realize who you are, and you begin to realize who you're not, and you begin to pull away from your attachments to all these ego states, which is why these promises, you begin to experience them after a fifth step. You're starting to experience a lot more of what Joe called your oneness. I may have had certain spiritual beliefs, but now I begin to have a spiritual experience. Not going to happen, ladies and gentlemen, until you've done your fifth step, if you believe the book. The feeling the drink problem has disappeared will often come strongly. We feel we're on the broad highway walking hand in hand with the spirit of the universe. Those are some of the most powerful promises in the entire book, and those will manifest in my life when I get done reading this fifth step, if it's written and you've seen truth. Now again, I believe spiritual virtue and following instructions. Then I send them home. It says returning home, I find a place where I can be quiet for an hour. Doesn't say 58 minutes, doesn't say 62, it says an hour. Take a timer, set your timer. Now you're going to answer some questions. I'm going to carefully review what I have done. So I start out and I review this inventory I just read. Then I thank God from the bottom of my heart. I know God better. I don't know if you've ever thought about this. It's a paradox. How is it that I can know God better as a result of reading this inventory? Because the inventory, in the process of reading the inventory, you begin to awaken to who you are, and you begin to realize who you're not. You're not all those ego states that you thought you were, which is why you know God better. So I read the first 5 proposals. Now I'm going to ask those questions Joe talked about. Have I omitted anything? For I'm building an arch to which I walk a free man. Is my work solid so far? Are the stones properly in place? The second step is my cornerstone. The third step is my keystone. Have I skimped on the cement put into the foundation? Step 1. Have I tried to make mortar without sand? And then I just sit until the hour is over. And then I turn the page. It says if I can answer to my satisfaction all those questions, I look at step 6. We've emphasized willingness as being indispensable. And now there's 2 questions to the 6th step. Here's what they are. Am I now ready to let God remove from me all the things I have admitted are objectionable? Can He now take them all, every one? 2 questions in the 6th step. I'm going to stop here and let Joe share for a while. I have a tool I use called the Sacraments of Penance, and I use that for steps 6. And the reason I do is I've never in my life seen a tool that would allow me to identify the exact nature of my defects like that tool. That tool takes the 7 deadly sins and talks about them in a way that I can understand, and really talks at great depth. Any form of spiritual pride any person has, you'll be stripped of by going through that, and that's the essence of what I use that tool for, to help me identify the things which I have admitted are objectionable. And the next question is one of faith. Do I believe that God can take them now, every one? And then it says, and if I still cling to something I don't let go of, I ask God help me be willing, and then I get down on my knees and I say the 7-step prayer. I'll let Joe chat for a bit here.
So I was 5 years sober in Denver, and I went through the work several times in those 5 years. And after the first time with unfinished amends, I thought, and I told other people, that I'd had a spiritual awakening as a result of the steps, and that I was in step 12. And I would like to say that that was true. I believed it was true. The funny thing about truth, that it's true as long as you believe it is until you find out it is or it isn't. And I had about 50 unfinished amends, and I thought I had done a pretty good job. I had done, right? And I quit making amends, and I was about 1.5 years sober, and my life had totally changed. I went from somebody who you would not have wanted around your children to somebody who was made the director of a program for the National Council on Alcoholism, training kids to work with kids. It was one of the first peer counseling programs in the country. And I didn't know how that happened. And I rested on my laurels. Laurels are past accomplishments. I settled for comfort. I settled for relief rather than freedom. And within a short period of time, I hit bottom again, and it was on frivolous, casual, harmful sex. 2 women were pregnant from my sobriety. And I hit the wall, and I remember it still. To this day, it's the most terrifying day I've had since I started the work when I was 6 months sober. And I woke up one day, and my ego said, there's been too much harm. There's too many lies. The work is not going to work. And I didn't know where I was going to go. And I said a prayer, and I called my sponsor, and he said, come on over. And the needed power to finish amends was not there. I didn't think it had much to do with me drinking again, because I had been changed to such an... My own mother at that time heard me speak in my hometown in Battle Creek, Michigan, and she said to me, you're not even the same person. And I settled for that. And before I was a year and a half sober, here comes another bottom. And I came really close to drinking again with unfinished amends, thinking I'd been through the 12 steps. Now, I'd had a major awakening. I had a life-altering experience with 1 through 9 3/4. I'd made about 300 amends. I'm not a big-time gangster, but I lived in a lot of different places. Where I live, I cause harm. It's just the way it was. And we reviewed 1, 2, and 3. I saw my motivation again. And there wasn't much of an inventory. There was some resentments. And there was a thorough sex inventory. I had not formed an ideal that was for me. It was an ideal to please the person, my sponsor. It was not an ideal I could live up to, nor was it an ideal that I wanted to live by. And read that inventory, added some new amends to my old list, and the second time I started the work, I was given the power and the grace to finish every amends I was consciously aware of before I was 3 years sober. And I've never been the same. I've never come to this work or anything in my life without the power of God. I've denied it sometimes. I seem to fall into a form of denial sometimes that I don't hear talked a lot about in AA. And I know I'm not the only one that's had it, because a lot of my friends have. And it's the denial of the grace of God. It can actually be stronger, because I know a lot of people that didn't have much denial about alcoholism when they got here. They were just pretty beat. They just kind of knew. I didn't have a lot of denial about alcoholism after 10 treatment centers and having been a therapist. This can be a form of denial stronger than the denial you came here with. It's when you start to take the credit for what a great job you've done. You're in the denial of the grace of God. And all of a sudden I woke up one day, and it doesn't happen all the time for everyone, like the day you finish your last amends that you're aware of. But somewhere around there I woke up one day and I realized I didn't owe anybody anything, even though there was going to be some ongoing amends. By finishing amends, we don't mean everybody's been paid. We don't mean the ongoing amends to a mother or a family member that will be the rest of your life is done. We mean that every approach that you're consciously aware of, even the ones you've been unable to find, the book is really clear. I had some that I had to write a letter and share with somebody and say to myself, if I ever find this person, I've done my best to find them, I'll make the amends face to face. And I didn't have one amends where I hadn't made the approach. And that's a day I've always wished there was a better word for it. And I guess the best word I've been able to find, even though the big book has a better word, just to be current with every amends you're consciously aware of up to today. And I realized I've dreamed that for a long time, if I could just start fresh. I watched a relationship with a mother that I thought could never be healed. I found resentment that I had lived with my entire life gone when I made amends at my father's grave. Please don't ever let anybody tell you can't make amends to someone who's dead. Even if you don't know where their grave is, even if they were cremated, ask God. Put the outcome. I think the most powerful line, the longer I do this in the ninth step, is that we place the outcome in God's hands, not someone else's. And I can't tell you the number of places we've been around the country, including Los Angeles, where I used to live, where sponsors edit people's amends list. because of amends they don't want to make. I can't tell you the number of guys I've met recently whose sponsors told them, you do not go back to the women you were in relationships with. My God, my sponsor said to me, that's some of the biggest harm in your life, some of the most important amends. Just be clear with them why you're there. You want them to know why you're there, so they don't get any wrong ideas. Oh my God, he's coming back into my life again. No. My two most powerful amends to this day have been at grave sites, one with my father and one with